Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Radical Candor Podcast. I'm Kim Scott.
I'm Jason Rosoff.
And I'm Amy Sandler. And today we're answering a question from a listener who has found themselves in a bit of a performance management pickle. This listener writes, quote, "Hi, I just started my career as a manager. I occasionally listen to the Radical Candor podcast, and I find it very helpful in a way that it inspires me to be the kind of manager that I want to be." So first of all, we're happy to hear that.
Thank you.
Thank you. The listener continues, quote, "I have this dilemma and I want to seek advice. Recently, an employee was moved to my team and he became my direct report. This new direct report has been bouncing around from project to project, and in 1 year, he's moved to 4 managers already. Since I'm his new manager and it's near the end of the year, I will be the one to accomplish his performance appraisal. So I asked for feedback from previous team members and managers he worked with. Some said that his competency is below his current level and that he mostly needs assistance on every task assigned to him. Some said he's a good team player and eager to learn. The comments I got were contradictory, so it's really hard for me to gauge where he's currently at. So my question is, for the performance appraisal, should I just give a rating of, quote, meets expectations for the benefit of the doubt? I want to know your thoughts about my situation. What else can I do to help this direct report?"
This is a tricky situation, I think. My instinct, but I'd love to hear from the rest of you all. My instinct is that I would probably give this person a meets expectations, and I would say, but I would be kind of blunt. Like, I don't have a great read on your performance yet. I would be radically candid about that. And say this may be incorrect. And I think what I might try to do is a sort of an informal 360. So say,
Yep.
I'm going to try to get a better read on your performance. I got different signals from different folks. And I would also promise to maybe spend a little extra time with this person for the coming quarter, at least, to make sure that I was very clear on what the job was, what the expectations were, and whether this person felt like they needed or wanted extra help. I think that's what I would do, but I want to acknowledge this is a tricky situation.
Yeah. And Jason, I'm curious to get your thoughts, but Kim, when you sort of were in agreement about meets expectations, and I know we've talked about this a little bit, but in your mind, what does meets expectations mean? What were you agreeing to with that?
In my mind, meets expectations is neutral. And what I'm really saying is, I don't know. and I would be sort of clear. I don't know what the right rating is. And this is a really hard thing for managers to say, because it feels like you should know. And of course you should know. But if you don't know, the right thing to do is to say, I don't know, and therefore I'm going to give you a neutral rating. And here's what I'm going to do to find out. And I would say, you can ding my rating for not knowing. Like, I wish I knew. But I mean, I don't think it would be fair for this person who wrote in to get dinged, because they can't know at this point. And so I guess I'm advocating for being clear that you don't have a good read on the review, on the performance. And that's why you're giving a neutral rating.
The phrase that's coming to mind as we're having this conversation is this. This is because I watched too much law-related TV recently, but which is, we don't suborn perjury here at Radical Candor.
Yes. Yes.
Like, I would never tell this person to. So Kim, I like the combination of things, which is, hey, let's do the 360 and get the feedback. But I haven't observed these things myself. There's some contradictory signals here. So from my perspective, we need to gather new data, right? Like, and we're just starting to work together. And so hopefully over the course of the next months or year, we'll gather some additional data, and I'll be able to provide you some more guidance as to what to do. But like, because in my mind, the contradictory signals may not actually be contradictory. They seem contradictory on the surface, but maybe on one project, the person was doing something they were terrible at.
Yeah.
And on the other project, they were doing something they were pretty good at.
Yeah. Or maybe with one manager, they had a good, a working relationship that was productive. And maybe with the other manager, they didn't work well together for whatever reason. I mean, I think in addition, Jason, a thing that I would think about is to figure out, has this person bounced around or has this person been bounced around?
Been bounced around, yeah.
Yeah, because I've often inherited people who've had a huge number of managers in a short amount of time. And very often they're exhausted and demoralized. And the reason why they're exhausted and demoralized is because educating a new boss is tiring. It's probably, on my list of least favorite things to do. It's right up there, unless the boss is just wonderful. But I mean, educating your boss is not fun, as a general rule. And when you have to do it over and over and over again, that's real burnout material.
Because one of the things that, as you were saying, that came to mind for me was, I remember I inherited a team that had gone through a series of managers. And I was like excited to meet everybody. And I was really looking forward to all these get to know you conversations. And I got into them and I was like, everybody's so grouchy. And it took me a while to realize, like, the problem was they were just like, is this another waste of my time? Like telling this person what I do and explaining my strengths, like what I'm working on and all this other stuff. Am I just spinning my wheels yet again? And it was I felt sort of sad that like that.
Yeah.
I was on the receiving end of that, but I did, it took me, after I appreciated where it was coming from, it did help me change my approach a little bit, which was like, maybe the idea of offering extra help is really saying like, I want to have an opportunity to collaborate with you, as opposed to like, I want you to send me reports of what you are doing every week.
Yeah.
So that I can understand what you do here. It's more like, can we work together?
I'm wondering, to get tactical here, Kim, you talked about a 360. If we are assuming this writer has to do the performance appraisal in a relatively short amount of time, but from a Radical Candor perspective, we want to have the order of operations. We want to solicit feedback. And I'm curious, what conversation would you have with this direct report prior to the performance appraisal to maybe learn more about the context or the history or their own take on it? I'm curious, Jason, how would you have that conversation? What would you start by soliciting feedback from that person on?
I think Kim had it right, which is, I think the place that you start is by saying, hey, we have to do this performance appraisal, and we have not worked together long enough for me to develop an opinion about your performance. And here's my proposal. I'm soliciting feedback from you on this proposal, which is, I'm going to give you a rating of meets expectations, and then we'll go through this other process. I think that is what I would solicit feedback on. I guess it's a little unfair, I think, to like put too much of the decision making onto this person who's already at a disadvantage since they've like hopped around manager to manager. So I think I would go in with a proposal and an open mind if they had an alternate way of approaching it. Kim, what do you think?
I think that's exactly right. I think the other thing that I would do, and that I have done when I've inherited a team, is I've said, look, it's a pain in the ass to have to educate your boss, and I don't want to be a pain. My goal here is not to be a pain in the ass. So if there are reports that you're already doing, can you just CC me on them? If there are meetings that you're already having, maybe I can observe them. Like, don't feel like you have to create decks for me and summarize stuff for me. Like, what is the way that I can learn what I need to know, what you want me to know as quickly as possible, that creates as little work for you? And so I think that's another thing that I would ask as part of the follow up, so that I can know. And I think I would also ask, if I'm going to do a 360, who do you think I need to include? And I would also want to say, let me get your perspective on like, if I'm going to ask these previous 4 managers that you've had in the last year, about you. Yeah, I want to.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was curious about.
Yeah.
Do you want to get their take on what happened? Why so many managers?
Why so many managers? And also, I would like to get your take on their performance. That it's a two-way street. It's
interesting.
It's not just I'm going to ask these people about you, but I'm going to ask you about these people. Like, what was it like to work for these different people? And that would help me get context. Like for the person who said I had to supervise every step of the way, maybe this person who I've inherited, say this one person was a total micromanager and drove me nuts. And so then that, then you're getting both sides of the story.
And timing wise, you would have that conversation before the actual performance appraisal, telling them what you're going to do in the performance appraisal, and then start having the 360 after?
Well, in an ideal world, yes, but as we have said before, this is not an ideal world. It sounded like, I got the impression from what this person wrote that the performance review process was underway. And that's often a train that you can't slow down.
Mm-hmm.
So they had to give the person a rating. If I had time to talk to all these people before, then I might not have to say, I don't know, and I get a meets. But it sounded like this person had to give a rating right away before they could know.
Yes, that's how I understood the note as well. The thing that I would be prepared for, so the other side of this, the thing that I would be prepared for if this person finds themselves in that situation is that this person could be annoyed at the meets expectation. Maybe they feel like they've exceeded expectation. You know what I'm saying? Like,
mm-hmm.
I think it's a reasonable thing to suggest, but they could rightfully be annoyed. But I think if you laid the case out with the details that they've shared and the proposal that they're making, you can say, and some organizations, this is not annual, it's biannual. And so like there might be an opportunity in 6 months to do something different. In some organizations, there's also exceptions. So like you could say, meaning you can ask for a 6-month appraisal as opposed to waiting until the end of the year. I know some companies do that. So there may be some other options that would allow the both of you not to wait an entire year before the appraisal is redone.
Going back to Kim, sort of, I want a neutral answer where you could create a system where there is this not enough information neutral answer. Have you seen that done?
Never.
Yeah.
These systems are usually pretty rigid, even at companies that pride themselves on being flexible. And I don't think a manager can. What you could do as a manager, and I have done this, but rarely, is just not submit anything. And then, tell your boss, I haven't submitted because it's not fair to submit yet. But usually that creates so many, HR goes nuts because, I haven't done my job. And then sometimes there are automatic penalties for the person and for me. And so usually I've found it better to submit and then to say, I don't know, and then to go back and make an appeal to make a change later. That sometimes there's, in fact, not just sometimes, usually there's an appeals process where if a rating turns out to have been unfair, you can change it later. I mean, you have to do a lot of work usually to do that, but it's often possible.
If you could design any performance system that would have a place where you could say, I don't have enough information yet, what change would you make?
I think that I would give people, I understand why this doesn't usually happen. If you give managers the option of saying, I don't have enough information,
then there would be no reviews.
You'll never get through the 360. I have so much compassion for HR leaders who are trying to get through a 360 process. It is really hard to get people to do this. And so I think what I would do is I would allow for a small number of oops, I got the rating wrong.
Appeals, yeah.
Appeals. But the manager would have to say, oops, I got the rating wrong. Or an employee could say, I think my manager got my rating wrong. I mean, that's pretty tricky to do, but not impossible to do.
I like that. I think some of the frustration of these moments is the result of being very impactful to your life, but by determining how much bonus you get and whether you're eligible for a raise or promotion. That stress combined with getting it wrong, meaning that you don't have another chance for a year to make an adjustment, means that you're going to force some suboptimal decisions, and having some kind of appeals process at least gives you a pressure release valve for when things are badly wrong.
And I think that also it's important to note that there's such a mismatch between, for the manager, you've got, maybe you have 10 direct reports. And so you're putting in 10 numbers into a system, and then you're usually having to write up an explanation of why you've chosen these numbers. But it's not that big of a thing to do, but the impact that you have on whatever you decide in the moment impacts whether the person has enough money to take vacation. It impacts whether the person can make rent, whether the person, in some cases, like where there's big RSU grants, you're making $1 million decisions for not often, but sometimes, when the stock options are going up, you're making decisions about whether someone gets promoted or not gets. So it's a big deal for the manager, but it's a really big deal for the employee, and kind of the mismatch between those two things is part of what creates the stress.
Very well said. And for those of you who didn't know, including myself, restricted stock unit, RSU.
Yes.
Yeah.
I wanted to go back, Kim, you were talking about having this person help you get up to speed, acknowledging that can be really frustrating for someone. And I wanted to bring in, there was a user named Joel Etherton in Stack Exchange. There was an approach that they shared about performance reviews. And he says, this situation used to happen all the time when I was in the military. Performance review time would be up, and boom, supervisor is on remote temporary duty for 6 months, or you get assigned a new supervisor because of an organizational restructure. It happens all the time. The only constant in the entire process is you. So you are the only one who can be depended upon to make sure that your review is conducted properly, fairly, and timely. This person says they've said this in other postings, but I'll never get tired of saying it. You should always keep a I love me folder somewhere. And this was from 2014. But they said, I prefer a hard copy file most of the time, but in my current consultant role, I've transferred my file to digital, uploaded it to a shared drive so I can get to it anywhere, anytime. In this folder, emails, memoranda, recorded metrics, all the good stuff you've done. This should include any benchmarks on projects, deliveries, anything you would put on a resume or on a project completion report. So keep track of the stuff you haven't done as well. But this would be more of a personal improvement plan. So you could identify problems you had with projects, places you feel improvements can be made, include a plan for making those improvements, provide citations for when you sought feedback and assistance. And so in a nutshell, what this person is saying is you want to be able to provide this folder to your new supervisor in a meeting to identify all the good things you've done, places you feel can be improved, and anything that shows you're a team worker, an asset to the organization. Coming to your performance review prepared in this fashion will only impress your supervisor more. And there was a timeline on the question that came up, and this person said, in the next 2 days, I suggest you use some time to track down every bit of this kind of information. And so I just think as the holidays are coming, people might have some time. There could be some real value of putting this together so that you do have it handy. I'm just thinking about what might be the other side of the story here, where maybe there isn't as much visibility. What do you both think of that advice? I love me.
I made an assumption. I think that's first of all, a great name for the folder. I made an assumption, which was that the review process included a self-evaluation, because almost every one that I've been a part of, almost every sort of performance rating process that I've been a part of included a self-evaluation. So bad on me for making that assumption. And thanks to Joel for making explicit what was implicit here, which is you should absolutely be soliciting the narrative from that person about their own performance. I just think that because you haven't had the chance to observe it, I don't think it can be relied on independently of this sort of 360 feedback gathering process and other things. I think it's a useful signal and really important for them to do. You still need more data.
Kim, anything?
Totally.
Do you have an I love me folder?
I do not. I would find it. I mean, I think it's a great idea. I want to be totally clear. I think everybody should have an I Love Me folder and keep track of the work that they've done that they're proud of. At the same time, it feels like one has to do that when things are broken.
Yeah.
More than when things are not broken. But if a person has had 4 managers in the last year, things are broken.
Things are broken, yeah.
So it's probably a good idea to keep the I Love Me folder. I think is a great idea.
It goes to some of what we've talked about with, having the kinds of reviews where managers of managers are getting feedback, because you don't necessarily know. I mean, I've been in situations where my assumption was that what I was doing was being communicated upwards, and that wasn't always the case. Brandy, I don't know if I can put you on the spot, but I think you've had your own experience with the I Love Me folder.
Yes, 100%. I am an inherently cynical person. I don't trust authority or bosses or parents or anything. So I would always keep a list of everything that I did and communicate it during my weekly one-on-one. And then it came in very handy when I had to write my self-evaluation, because I didn't have to go back and remember everything I had done that year because I had already had it.
Mm-hmm.
But I assume that most people are incompetent and not looking out for me. That's my default. So I'm just, looking out for myself. I don't have one now, I will say, working for Radical Candor. I do not have an I Love Me folder.
Ah, damn. I was hoping to see the I Love. Well, I will write, you know what, Brandy? We will, Jason and I and Amy will write our We Love Brandy.
I have often worked for bosses who I had little to no interaction with. So in order to get an appropriate raise or promotion, I would really have to keep that folder.
I was going to add a caveat to what you're saying, Kim, which is that in really matrixed teams, it actually can, even if things aren't quote unquote broken, it can be really valuable to keep track of those things. Because if you don't work alongside your manager, which is fairly common for a lot of people, meaning their managers are in their function, but their team is across functions. The people they work with every day do not include their manager. And so I always appreciated the teammates who worked for me who did this. And we would often do it as a shared document, meaning they would share it with me as they were building it, and I would be able to add things to it. So I would say here's a thing that went well, or here's an opportunity to do something a little bit differently. We would keep track of those things together. And it was way easier come performance review time to have to collaborate with the people who had been keeping track than the people who hadn't been keeping track, because everybody suffers from recency bias, including you.
Yeah,
mm-hmm.
That's a really important point.
But no one ever called it an I Love Me folder.
Yeah.
That is the innovation in this conversation.
That's a big innovation, though. I love that. Words matter,
Yeah.
I haven't had one, and I think I keep assuming I'll remember to go get that email from that person in April.
Yeah. It's hard to remember to do.
Hard to remember to do. Before we close, I'm curious, think about collaborating and the conversations that this listener was writing in about asking previous managers. What is the specific question that you would ask those other managers to try to get the most specific responses of, tell me specifically what this person did? Because we got feedback in the letter that they, I asked for feedback. Some said the competency is below his current level. Some said good team player. I'm curious, what is the question or questions that you would ask to get the most effective or specific responses that would be helpful for you?
This person is probably asking the right first question, which is what has this person done really well over the last year, or while they were working with you? What could they do better? And I think the two other questions that I wind up asking the most are, can you tell me more about that? And can you give me a specific example of that?
Jason, can you tell me more about that?
Yeah, I think the sort of giving a specific example or asking someone to tell a story. what was the thing that this person did that really surprised you? What was and that you could get a positive surprise, you could get a negative surprise, but talking about surprises often elicits a story. And I think that another question is to sort of say what was the project that this person worked on that was most successful and what was least successful. And then ask more details, as Jason was saying, sort of about the project. What happened on the project? What was the goal of the project? That I think those kinds of questions can be instructive.
And I will just say as a caveat, having been on some projects several roles ago that were not successful despite every effort, the follow-up that I would be curious about from my own personal experience would be, to what extent did this person contribute to the success or lack of success on this project? What more could that person have done that would have helped make things more successful?
Yeah. Was this person part of the solution or part of the problem? Because very often a project goes sideways, but that doesn't mean that the person did anything wrong. The person was like jumped into the breach and saved the day.
Jason, anything else?
What I'll say is that if you're not used to doing these types of, if you're not used to going out and having conversations with people to gather feedback for a 360 or a Speak Truth to Power meeting or something like that, I think it can be very uncomfortable to keep pushing for details, but it is absolutely your number one job is to walk out with very specific details. And it can seem sort of annoying to say, can you tell me a story about that? Can you give me a specific example? Is there a particular project where that happened? It can feel like pulling teeth at first, but usually once you get someone talking, I will say once the sort of the top is off the bottle, things will go more smoothly. But you need to push through that initial discomfort if you're going to get good information.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. I also think it can be really useful to say, "Oh, I don't quite understand that project. Can you explain it to me?" There was somebody I worked with who would ask people to explain it to his great uncle.
Was that Uncle Scrammy?
Yes, it was Scrammy. Exactly, Uncle Scrammy. You have a memory. Scrammy is
it's a memorable name.
Yes. And so sort of saying, I try not to say I don't understand if I really do understand, because that's obnoxious. But when I'm not quite getting it, it's really tempting to pretend like you get something and sort of going into these conversations, being prepared to say, I don't understand what you mean. I wasn't part of that project, because very often things are obvious to a person who's been deeply involved with a project, and it's not at all obvious to anyone else.
I think that's such a good point. And actually, I'm thinking, Jason, with the suggestion that you were having for our listener and folks in our listener's shoes, of understanding that it might be actually challenging to get some of those details, and we might feel frustrated, especially if these are our peers, to feel like we're pushing them. And in many ways, it sounds like maybe even the same frustration that the employee could be feeling of I know you've had to update another boss. Now we're going to our peers and saying, hey, you've probably had this conversation a few times. But I think anchoring on why it's important and why it's sort of our shared goal to help this person, might also be helpful. But I think naming that we might feel a little we're burdening these people. They're also busy with their own performance reviews. They don't really have time.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I just think it's really important also to be willing to say, I don't get it. I don't understand. In this situation.
It may be role modeling for your peers.
Yes.
to admit that you do not understand something. Because my guess is every single manager that this person has had has felt the same way as you right now. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
If they've only had this person for 3 months at a time, they've also been in the situation where they're I don't know exactly what's going on and how to approach this. I think that's a great way to approach a peer, is to say, with humility, to say hey, I inherited this person. I already work with them. And I know this is, in some ways probably a repeat, but it's really important to me to have a complete record so that when I submit this person's performance review, I know that we're submitting a complete picture. So I'm going to ask a bunch of questions. And if it seems like I'm digging for details because I feel like that's what I owe this person in order to give them effective, useful feedback and a high quality rating.
All right. Time for the tips.
Before we jump into the tips.
Yeah, you have something else on your mind.
I have one other thing to recommend if you're the boss of an employee who's had a bunch of different bosses. I think sometimes bosses go in and they tell their new employees, like, I'm going to tell you my operating instructions. I'm going to tell you the easiest way to work with me. And I think if you flip that on its head and say, I'd love to know your operating instructions so I can work differently with each of you, that is far less annoying. So that's another tip for new bosses, or for bosses who are inheriting someone who's had a bunch of different bosses. All right. Sorry. Let's go with the tips, Amy.
Oh, yeah. All right. Well, as you know, if you are not a new listener, it's time for our Radical Candor checklist. We want to give you some tips that you can use and start putting Radical Candor into practice.
Tip number 1, do a 360-degree performance review of a new employee, of anyone who's new to your team, so that you can solicit specific feedback from others who are more familiar with their work. Ask the employee who you should include.
Tip number 2, if you're the employee in this situation, or just anyone at work, it can be really helpful to have an I love me folder. You can change the name, but we're enjoying the I love me folder, and put your wins and losses, areas where you want to improve, and any metrics, any memoranda, emails, etc. Putting that together so that you can easily complete a self-evaluation can be helpful, but also it will help you get this new manager up to speed about your performance goals and metrics. And just to also acknowledge, for those of us who might have procrastinatory tendencies, we're probably not going to remember to do that thing of forwarding the email for ourselves. So if you can do it just as it's happening and put it in a place. And Jason, also, if you want to add your tip about the sort of shared collaborative, I love us folder. How would you, name that folder?
I love me folder, but I get to contribute to it. It can be really useful to have these things be shared documents so that there's a running record of it and that other people can contribute to it as well. Like other people might notice something that you did really well, and it'd be nice to have that reflection in there.
Awesome. You want to bring us home for tip 3, Jason?
Tip number 3, commit to getting to know the person who's new to your team, and try to do that in the least annoying way possible. You want to make sure that the expectations of the role are clear, and you want to give the person an opportunity to start fresh, but you also want to learn from them what are the best ways to work with them. So I love Kim's final suggestion of, like, what are your operating instructions? What's the best way for me to work with you? What's the best way for me to learn from you in a way that doesn't add work to your plate?
So before we totally close, what is our favorite thing for today? Shall we talk about our favorite things?
My favorite thing today is not a product. Over the Thanksgiving holiday, I spent a lot of time snorkeling, and my favorite thing is the incredible sort of diversity and creativity of small things in the ocean. That's my favorite thing today. It gives me so much pleasure to see all these different kinds of fish and all these different kinds of coral and all these different kinds of shells. And every day it's different. It's just awe-inspiring. So that's my favorite thing today, is what is underneath the surface of the ocean. You can't buy it.
Now I want to see if there's any pictures of your snorkeling.
Blue Planet. If you want to taste and you are not close to an ocean.
Blue Planet, yes.
Well, here's to inspiring awe. If you would like some actual Radical Candor tips, we've got those too. radicalcandor.com/resources. What have we got there? You might ask. Well, we've got free learning guides. You could sign up for Radical Candor on Masterclass. We recently had them on our podcast. Get our lit video book, our workplace comedy series, The Feedback Loop, so much more. Show notes are at radicalcandor.com/podcast. Kim, do we like to say praise in public and private, criticize in private?
Yes, we do.
Yeah, we do like to say that. So If you like what you hear, rate and review us wherever you're listening. And if you have criticism, email it to podcast@radicalcandor.com. We also love getting your questions, your possible stories. Thank you again to our listener for sharing this really tricky situation. We hope it was helpful. Bye for now.
Take care.
The Radical Candor podcast is based on the book Radical Candor, Be a Kick-Ass Boss Without Losing Your Humanity by Kim Scott. Episodes are written and produced by Brandy Neal with script editing by me, Amy Sandler. The show features Radical Candor co-founders Kim Scott and Jason Rosoff and is hosted by me, still Amy Sandler. Nick Carissimi is our audio engineer. The Radical Candor podcast theme music was composed by Cliff Goldmacher. Follow us on LinkedIn, Radical Candor the company, and visit us at radicalcandor.com.